In the world of video games, making a new IP can be very tough, and selling it to the gamers can be even tougher, as most go for sequels and long-running franchises. But sometimes these games can be really good, and even then they can be good, they can also be passed up. And today we're looking at one such game. Immortals of Aveum was released in August 23 by Ascent Studios, a debut title for the developers, and published under the EA Originals. It's a first-person magic shooter that blends fast-paced combat, RPG mechanics, all set in a high fantasy narrative in the war-torn world of Aveum. Can it carve its identity with its focus on spell-slinging combat, environmental puzzles, and a lore-heavy story? Or is it a flawed debut? But that isn't the main question. The main question is this game worth your time? But before I answer that, I'm Damon and welcome to Stay Tuned on Gaming, where I get to talk about video games for as long as I want. And today we're going to be looking at one of the very few EA originals released in recent years, Immortals of Aveum. If you want to see more videos like this, please comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and tell me, do you think that this game is worth your time? And what other hidden games or hidden gems may you have found that many haven't played before? Let's get into the game. So, let's get into the story of Aveum. The world of Aveum is a realm sustained by ley lines, ancient conduits of magic that fuel its civilization and its magic. But Aveum isn't at peace. In fact, it's been involved in the Everwar, a millennia-long conflict between nations that are vying for control of these ley lines. You assume the role of Jack, a street-smart thief who's kind of doing his normal thing, keeping his makeshift family a friend and of course stealing. Until one day, an attack from an invading force leaves Jack with an immense amount of loss from his family and his best friend dead. He's eventually discovered to be an unforeseen, a rare individual capable of wielding all three colors of magic: force, stasis, and life. And he's eventually conscripted into the elite Immortals by General Kirkin. Jack must now navigate political intrigue, ancient prophecies, personal loyalties, all to prevent the apocalypse and the end of Aveum. Now, this game's story is, I would have to say, okay, look, it's nothing amazing. Look at it. There's some themes in here of sacrifice, cost of war, ethics of power, and all that stuff. And it has a good backdrop with some interesting lore, but it also isn't that super interesting. I would say if you've watched any B fantasy film or any anime that has fantasy stuff in it, you've probably seen this story 100 times of the chosen one trope, getting thrown into the army with these elite people that have all these special abilities, and then becoming part of like the only person that can change the war with some twists and turns here. You can tell what exactly is going to happen from the start of the game to the end of the game. Even the twists and turns, there is simply nothing remarkable about the story, which is a shame because, again, it has an interesting backdrop, some good lore, and a world that's actually beautiful and one to be explored from. But the game just doesn't make it super interesting. And that goes the same with the characters. Jack is your normal formulaic protagonist you've seen everywhere. He's got the chosen one trope, he's likable, reluctant heroism, and he always has snarky quips that he has to make. Devon becomes your scholarly mentor and kind of your friend, and he acts like the comic relief with many jokes. Zendaya is your normal rough and gruff character with some softness to her, who at first hates you and then turns into the ally. Every character is very stereotypical that you've seen, and almost all of them are very underdeveloped. The only one that I could say has some development or intrigue into her is General Kirkin, played by Gina Torres, and he's the leader of the Immortals. There is some moral ambiguity with her in the story, but that's only because the story really gives a lot of focus onto her characters. Like, not even the villain has a really developed, interesting stuff into him. He becomes very boring, especially around the end of the game. And the dialogue itself doesn't help because it's very cliche around a lot of the places. But the game also has some other issues, like weird pacing issues. The beginning of the game is very brisk and does a good job introducing you into the world and the lore. And the second half, not so much, as it feels very repetitive, very fillery, and feels like it's just stretching out a lot of it. The third act does pick up with a really good end, I have to say. The end is at least super strong and ends up on a much more hopeful message, but the game just isn't that interesting when it comes to its story. It feels like there's a larger plot at tail here. Like, they're telling you something larger that's happening in the background, and you don't really get to be told exactly what's happening, because you get to speak to other characters that don't show up in the story whatsoever, and they seem so much more cooler and have so much more interesting tales than anything that's happening in the main story. The game also gives you this illusion of choice. Like, At certain points, you get to talk to characters and they give you dialogue options, and you get to learn more about the characters and, of course, the lore. But then they do actually give you like choices that you can make, and they have no impact whatsoever. And that's because you're going to end up with the same story and the same ending with the same characters. So I don't know why they gave us those options to even make those choices. It just feels like the game story never really goes out of its way to be super interesting. If you've watched any B-plot fantasy film or show before, that's exactly what this plot is. Look, it's not bad, but it's also not great. In the end, Immortals of Aveum's story is very forgetful and mediocre, but nothing bad, like really nothing bad. While the story is a bit mediocre, graphics-wise, I have to say Immortals of Aveum is a beautiful looking game. The environments are breathtaking. I love the sense of scale with these high and big buildings that the game does. There's a good variety in the environments, and even the enemy designs are pretty cool. There's a lot to really like and look at when it comes to Immortals of Aveum. The snowy areas, the lava caves, all down to the facial animation is really, really well done. Seriously, I have to give my hats off here. They do a really good job with the graphics. All the colors also makes the game pop, which is something I really like. And again, I just love the different looks, and you can even see how they really went into detail with the different armor and all the different designs that you get in the game. So again, hats off to them. I also really like the music of this game. I love the game's opening main theme. It's just this very bombastic, heroic like song that just gets you in. The overworld also has a really good theme as well, and throughout there's some really good music that just plays throughout the game. So generally some really great music in this game. The voice acting is also really good. The cast is bringing their A game here. Everyone sounds great, does a really good job, and while yes, the characters are boring and the dialogue gets very cliche, it really helps that there's some really good voice acting here. So no complaints on this side. There's nothing that's terrible here. There are some really good set piece moments that the game has, and the game also has like CG cutscenes instead of really having a lot of in-game cutscenes. There are some in-game cutscenes, but most of them are CG cutscenes, and all of that looks really, really good as well. Like if you were saying that this is a big animated movie, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some of this here. So no complaints here when it comes to graphics and the audio. So, when it comes to gameplay, the game is built on 3 pillars: spell-based combat, fluid movement, and an RPG-style progression. It's an FPS where guns are replaced by magical abilities. Jack has the sigil, which is this gauntlet that's bonded to his arm and serves as the conduit for the 3 schools of magic: blue, green, and red. And each school has its own advantages and disadvantages. Blue acts as your normal pistol. You're going to use it for everyday crowd control and precision. Green acts as your machine gun, making you use a barrage of weapons all at once. And red acts as your shotgun, doing very high damage up close. And that's kind of how you'll do it. Whenever you're in a combat situation, you'll switch to whichever color the enemy is, because it does way more damage to them if you use the same color, and then you'll be rounding it out with all your other tools. Now you actually have a lot of tools to play with here. You have yourself the whip, which is the basic ability to bring enemies close to you, or you making yourself fly across the map. You have a dodge ability, you have shields that you can use, you have lipids which can slow down very fast enemies so you can attack them much easier. You have an interruption ability, and every single weapon also has its own special attack, such as red has a blast wave for AoE damage, blue has shatter for breaking shields, green has a homing missile attack that you can make use of. And the game is all about trying to use everything you have at your disposal, staying alive, and making a lot of fast movements. And you know, for some parts, the game actually does work on that. If you ever find yourself in a tough spot, you'll have health crystals that you can pick up to use in battle to get health back. Then you have mana crystals that you can use to use your mana attacks, such as the homing missile attack or your big blast wave attack as well. So you'll always have like mana crystals and health crystals to keep you going in the fight. Then, of course, you have to face your enemies. And the enemy variety in here is actually pretty well done. There are some that will use shields, some that will come charging straight at you, some that will keep the distance and start and fling like arrows at you from a distance and try not to hit you. There'll be some that are just super heavy, like they're very heavy attacking as well. Some will heal other enemies. So there's a good variety of enemy design in this game, and you actually get a wide variety whenever you find yourself in a big battle arena. Later on, the enemies kind of become bullet sponges and very annoying to deal with, as you have to take them down by either hitting them on their back at certain points or just going through and attacking them until eventually they stagger, which you can also help by using your melee attack as well. You eventually unlock an ultimate attack, like you get one big ultimate attack that you unlock much later down the game, and it does some damage. Defeating enemies will fill your arcane bar, which you'll then use to basically earn ascension, which will help you buy new talents, which is basically the level up system in the game. And you can level up either in the blue bar, the red one, or the green one. And then you can also level up your special abilities, as well as making sure you get more for your ultimate attack and your health. Now, there's a lot going on with the combat, but it never really felt like a fluid combat system. Like, this game looks like you're supposed to play this fast-paced action combat that's gonna jump from one place to another, fight here, fight there. You're gonna switch between your different enemy attacks and try to hit them and hurt them. But it never really feels like that. It feels like the game is always just seconds too slow. Maybe it's how I played. Maybe it's because I didn't really figure out the combat. But it just never felt like that fluid system. It feels like if you were playing Devil May Cry, right? And you're trying to combo and do all these different attacks and abilities, but every single time you're trying to do it, the game slows down a couple of seconds and doesn't really make that fluid movement that you get in Devil May Cry. Which is a shame, because I think it could work, but the systems they have in place just don't. Whenever you try to use your whip, it feels too slow. Whenever you try using the lipids, it feels too slow and you can't really take advantage of. Switching between your different colors takes just a couple of seconds too slow for the gameplay to not really work as fluid as you want it to. And then you get the enemies, who are very annoying to deal with in a lot of occasions. Like I said, good variety, but many of them start to become bullet sponges. They become way more annoying than having to deal with them, and you never really feel that grasp of the system just working in this very one fluid motion. You jumping from one place to another, using it there, using your blades here, using your whip there, making sure you immediately punch them there. It just never feels like that. It also always feels like that you're kind of just always fighting against the enemy, and you never really feel powerful enough to take on the enemies. Maybe I had to do more exploration in the game, but hey, I just never really felt that the game ever got to that moment where I was in tune with the game and free-flowing and as fast as it wanted me to be, knowing exactly where I'm going to go and use what ability when. Just never really felt that way. And that's kind of a shame. As for the game, it also has a gear system. And gear system in here is fine. Look, it's nothing crazy. It's serviceable. It changed the properties of some weapons. Like, you can go from your blue magic goes from a normal pistol shot to a burst weapon to a singular powerful javelin. You know, green magic turns from a machine gun into a minigun. You then round it out with some of your totems and rings and braces, which can have different properties and cooldown or shield, stuff like that. But again, none of the gear was super impressive. It's okay, and you can even buy some gear that's very good, but none of it really felt impactful. Even the legendary gear that you get later on down the line and you can find kind of felt meh. I was like, oh, okay, but it's not really game-changing. There was nothing where I was like, oh my god, this is the greatest gear that I found in the game. They also didn't leave a lot for experimentation. You eventually will find a gear that fits for you, and you're hardly going to experiment after that, because the game really doesn't have that much experimentation to it. It thinks you have a lot of experimentation and using and switching between them, but it really doesn't. Again, it doesn't seem like it was really thought out that much, and it was kind of meh. Now, this game does actually have exploration, and it's actually a big part of the game. The main game has an overworld that's really more of a hub world. The overworld is not open world, but a hub world where everything is connected, and it leads to other areas which are in turn also quite big and huge. Some areas are inaccessible, as you'll see, because you don't have that ability yet, so they took the Metroidvania style of exploration. And sometimes there are puzzles that you have to complete to access certain chests. Now, when it comes to the exploration, it was actually pretty fun. Again, they used the Metroidvania style, so that's always kind of super fun, because you're like, oh, I wonder when I'm going to get that ability, or when I'm going to get that ability to get there. Now, chests would mostly contain gold, essence, or gear. Now, the essence and the gold is basically going to be used for upgrading your gear, because some gear can be upgraded to have different properties and stuff later on. And so that's what you're going to use that for. And then the gear you find is not that impressive at all. Now, you can use some of that gear to be dismantled later on, but you're going to dismantle most of that gear. You're mostly going to just stick to one or two different gear systems that you have. You can craft a little bit of gear, but not a lot. You can also buy gear, but again, buying gear is not that interesting. There's not really that amazing amount of gear that you find in the game. When it came to more exploration, you can often find shroud frames. Now, this was actually probably the funnest thing you had when you were exploring. Now, shroud frames kind of acts like Legend of Zelda shrines, if you've ever played that. Each one is completely different. Sometimes it's a platforming challenge. Other times it's it's a combat challenge, and at the end of completing them, it gives you a variety of rewards. It can either increase your health, mana, or even in some rare instances, give you a brand new move. I thought these were all very cool. Again, they're shrines from Legend of Zelda if you've ever played that game, and they were always really fun to do whenever you found them because, well, it gives you an increased health and increased mana. And trust me, you're going to want a lot of increased health and increased mana because the later game can get really, really difficult. And again, the combat just doesn't really work as well with the difficulty, and all the enemies just become very much bullet sponges. There are even special shroud finds where they have difficult bosses in them, and it should more the weakness of the gameplay for me. Now, I've said it in this game that the gameplay just didn't work with me, and as I continued playing the game, this is where I felt that the speciality of the game just kept falling off. The more I played the game, the more I kind of just didn't really care for the combat or the gameplay as much. More of the weaknesses such as the influid movement and just bullet sponged enemies became very boring to me. The exploration, while fun at first, and the puzzles really good at the beginning as well, also became super boring because I didn't really care so much about the puzzles anymore because it was mostly fit what color into what other color can be done there, and shoot green here, shoot blue there, and some of them were interesting, but then the rewards you got weren't interesting. Like, again, the gear just isn't that great. This one doesn't look cool as well since you're in the first person mostly. So the gear isn't that great, and what you find is pretty boring, and you can spend a good 5 minutes maybe trying to figure out one puzzle and then getting a gear that's pretty freaking boring. So even exploration later became something that just was a bore. And then you get into the gear that's not that great. The only thing that pushed me to go through to finish the game was just finishing the story and trying to complete the game for a review. See, it's pretty weird because, again, nothing in this game is bad. I'm not saying that any of this is terrible. Nothing here destroys the game. In fact, if I had got this game 10 years ago, I would have said this was a really good game and really great. But after playing so many titles, this game is just taking a lot of different other elements, and it doesn't really mesh well with a lot of them. And they don't really do one thing amazing. Like, the combat isn't amazing. It's serviceable, but it isn't amazing. The gear is serviceable again and fine, but it's also nothing really needed in here. And the exploration, while I enjoyed it and the open worlds are already done super well, just isn't as fun to do after a while because I didn't enjoy any of the rewards I got for doing it. So yes, nothing is bad in this game, but nothing is super amazing as well. Overall, it was pretty a meh experience when it came to the gameplay and the exploration and the gear. Even the enemies at the end started just become bullet sponges. And I was like, okay, I'm not really enjoying my time with this game anymore as much as I thought I was. Which is pretty weird because I mostly enjoy a lot of stuff. Again, nothing bad. Like, this isn't a terrible gameplay. This isn't horrible. This isn't the worst thing I've ever played. But it's also just pretty meh. Pretty forgettable in my opinion. So, what is there to say about Immortals of Aveum? Well, there actually isn't much. Look, this is not a bad game. In fact, it's a good game. There's nothing terrible about Immortals of Aveum. But it's a very forgettable title. I think the game looks great, has a great soundtrack, the voice acting is good, story-wise is okay, cliche, but fine. I would say boring and everything. And if I had to give like a number rating on this, because I don't give number ratings, I would give it the most 5 out of 10 game ever, you know? And if I had to give it everything and sum it up in one word, I would just say, meh, a pretty middling experience. But the main question is Immortals of Aveum worth your time? And the answer is no. Look, nothing against the game. I think it's fine, but it is just a meh game. It's a very forgettable experience. I had to go back and look on my gameplay to see how I felt playing it because I couldn't remember much about it. The moment I finished it, I was like, oh, okay, that was good, but I don't think I'm going to play it again. Like, I don't even think I would spend money on this game if I really had to. Maybe if I had to like rent it, maybe then it would be fine for a 2-day weekend and just play it. It's about 10 to 15 hours. If you really want to, you can run out and play a couple of more stuff. But there just wasn't anything really to grab me to Immortals of Aveum, which is a shame because, again, it looks great. It sounds great. There's some good gameplay stuff in here. It just doesn't grab you to really say, I'm definitely playing this game again. It is a game that comes and goes, a jack of all trades and a master of none. But that's just my experience. Please comment down below on your experience with the game. And if you want any titles in the same vein of this, comment down below. Is there something that's kind of in the same way of Immortals of Aveum where you thought, this game's okay, but very forgettable? Please. And of course, if you want to see more videos from this channel, please subscribe to the channel and check out some other videos that I have down below, or that's probably in right now. See you guys in the next game.